Hi everyone, welcome to our introduction to Hinduism. So Hinduism is going to be the first religious tradition that we're going to learn about in the course. And we start with Hinduism because we are going through the religious traditions in a chronological fashion. And Hinduism is the oldest of the world religious traditions. So it's the oldest or one of the oldest religious traditions in the world that's still being practiced, that still is a vibrant lived religion. So that's why we start with it, because it started such a long time ago. And we'll talk a little bit more about when exactly we think Hinduism began in our historical overview dimension. So you can see here I have an image. I'm sorry, my face is covering up part of the image, but I also have a quote down here. So for each of the traditions, I start with a quote that usually comes from the sacred scripture of that religious tradition. And for this one, I have the quote, "The truth is one, though it is known by many names." And this is a quote from the Vedas, which are the most sacred text, the most sacred scripture of Hinduism, which we'll learn a lot more about. So it's a quote that is very much a part of the Hindu tradition, and it gives us a good glimpse into the nature of this religious tradition. Hopefully by now you've started reading the Hinduism chapter from the God is Not One text, so this will be not new to you, but this quote tells us a lot about Hinduism, which is that it's a very diverse religious tradition. In a lot of ways, many of the traditions that we'll talk about, it's hard to sort of lump everything together into one set of beliefs, one doctrine, one form of practice. And for Hinduism, that is especially true. Really, a lot of people understand Hinduism more as a collection of religious beliefs than as one unified religious tradition. So as we go through Hinduism, we'll talk about as many of those different aspects as we can, how and when those aspects were integrated into Hinduism. And we'll try to cover some of the sort of mainstream or major belief sets that many Hindus agree with. But Hinduism is incredibly diverse. There is no single leader of Hinduism. There is no single organization of Hinduism. There are many different types of Hinduism. There's a lot of ways to be Hindu. So we'll come back to this theme again and again of diversity and multiplicity, which is rampant throughout Hinduism. And as Stephen Prothero says, different religious traditions are better at certain things. And one of Hinduism's many strengths is that it really understands that people are different. Not everyone is going to be religious in the same way. So there are many different ways to understand the nature of Hinduism, and there are many different ways to be Hindu. There's many different practices and rituals that are a part of Hindu devotional life. But you can see in this quote here that it does say the truth is one. So despite the diversity and multiplicity that runs throughout Hinduism, there is a central affirmation that there is a truth and that that truth is one, that truth is unified. So we'll see on the one hand, Hinduism emphasizes an overall unity and an overall homogenization, an overall similarity and sameness that we all have, that we all share. But it is very understanding of the fact that in the second part of the quote here, it's known by many names. So even though there is one truth, there is a central truth for all people, people understand that truth in different ways. They approach that truth in different ways. They come to understand that truth in many different ways. So this quote is a good one to start with because it gives us a glimpse into this sort of dual nature of Hinduism, that Hinduism does a very good job of keeping in balance unity and diversity, a oneness and a multiplicity. That overall the truth is one, people are one, God is one. But on the other hand, there is an acceptance and a tolerance of many different ways of understanding that truth and many different ways of approaching or experiencing that truth. So that's one thing that I want you to start thinking about in terms of Hinduism. I just forgot what I was going to say for the other one. So that's an important point. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention before we jump into Hinduism is that because it sort of encompasses and entails this diversity of understandings, it's hard to pinpoint one theism that corresponds to Hinduism. So as you read through the dimensions of religion, we went through all the different theisms. So there's monotheism, polytheism, henotheism, pantheism, all of those. Make sure that you read carefully through those different types of theism. For Hinduism, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly which theism Hinduism is because of this multiplicity of understandings. So as we go through Hinduism, that's something that I want you to think about, and that'll be one of your discussion questions, is which theism do you think most closely corresponds to Hinduism? Do you think it's ultimately a monotheistic tradition, a pantheistic tradition, a polytheistic tradition, which is what most people assume about Hinduism? For those of you who don't have any background knowledge or very little background knowledge about Hinduism, as you can see in this image here, most people have this view of Hinduism. They assume it to be, they understand it to be a polytheistic tradition. And for many Hindus, it is a polytheistic tradition. But we'll talk about some of the other ways that, that Hinduism is understood. And so to think about which type of theism you think that Hinduism most closely corresponds to. Okay, so that is a little bit just about the overall glimpse into Hinduism, introduction to Hinduism, and now we'll move on to our historical overview.